Now, this is Sharon Slater on the 12th of May 2017, and I'm interviewing Mike Grimes on life on the Shannon. So, first I'd like to find out about your family connection with the Shannon and with fishing, just in general.
Yeah, well, my family would have been involved in the fishing and reed cutting for many generations. My grandfather was also married to a Kona woman who was Davis, and their family as well would have been involved in the fishing and the reed cutting, and it all belongs to them, we'll say, you know.
What families were involved in your area in the fishing, reed cutting, with the family names?
Yeah, well, a lot of the families now that would have been fishing would be involved in the reed cut, but not all of them, you know. Some of them just had fishing licenses, and they might have had jobs outside of that as well, you know. But I suppose the fishing license holders, I'll give you their names first. I hope I don't leave anybody out now. There would have been there was Hickeys, Considines, Kennys, Powells, Davises, Grimeses, Cronins, I forgot the McInernys, and so that's about it now. It's I'm actually just going along the creeks. So that was. Yeah, that's about it, yeah.
So when you mentioned there about the creeks, so each of the families, they fished a certain area?
Well, no, we all had to fish the same area, but from the Stint Light, that was the start of the fishing grounds. It's just at Kona there, just below Kona Boatbed. So from there west were the fishing grounds. But the creeks, they were just kind of boat beds, as we called them, places to keep your boat safe, you know. They were kind of, some of them were natural creeks on the shore, and more of them were dug out. Most of them were actually dug out. They were all side by side, and each family had their own creek, you know. So some families would have had 2 or 3 boats, and it's if you go back to the 40s, 30s, 40s, 50s, some families would have had 3 and 4 licenses. You know, at that time you could just go in and get a license. You know, there was no applying for it and going through this process. You could go in and buy a license that time, you know. But that all changed with I suppose in the 60s, it started to become hard to get a license then, you know. If your family didn't have a license, you found it very hard then to get a license, you know. So actually in the 50s I think that changed, you know. But and as you know, the fishing's over now. It's 2006 was our last year fishing.
And the families, were they all close knit? Did they intermarry?
No, not really. No, there would have been a few cases, okay, you know. There would have been a few cases, but a lot of them married outside then as well, you know. And maybe 50-50, I'm not sure what I think about it. But we're probably all related one way or another if you go back far enough, you know.
And the families as well, did they use nicknames for each other, or just their given names?
Yeah, well, in particular now the Grimes families, there would have been maybe 6 different families of Grimeses, some related, some not. And of course, and a lot of them had the surname of Michael, John and Tom, and it kind of ran through a lot of the families, you know, so there was letters flying everywhere, you know. So our own nicknames, we were the Egg Grimeses, you had the White Grimeses, the Bus Grimeses, well, I suppose they would have been branches of them then, if you know what I mean, you know, but they would have been the main Grimeses, we'll say, to kind of distinguish them with those names, you know. So letters that came from my grandfather and father would have been addressed to Michael Grimes, and in brackets egg, especially the fishing licenses and application forms when they'd come out to distinguish the different Grimeses as well, But he would a good few families of Considines and Davises as well then, and they would have had different nicknames as well, But I suppose the Grimeses would have been the most common name out there, I suppose. It would have been at the time, and Davises now as well. But a lot of the Davises actually were killed in the First World War in the Navy, the British Navy, So there's still quite a few left, but that took its toll on them,
And what age were you when you started fishing?
I started fishing when I was 12 with my father. I would have been going out for, as we used to call it, spins in the boat with him when you'd be from 6 or 7 on, It was a nice day to take you out. And they might give you an oar just to be fooling around with it. And everybody started off rowing with on one oar. And if you gave a young fella to the 2 oars, he'd choke himself with them, But but I fished my first full season at the age of 12. I was actually going to primary school in Mealich at the time, and my grandfather was getting too old to fish a full season, so a guy came over from England for 2 years to fish. He was a Coonamman, Tom Perrell, but he had been in England for years and years, so my father was stuck for 2 years. I would have been 10 and 11. So this man came over and fished 2 seasons with him, and actually, unfortunately, he actually died after the second season. He died young, and I took over the following season. Then I was 12. I remember my father came up to Mealich School and had a chat with the headmaster about them, Mr. Kavanagh, and I got off 3 weeks early from school. I finished at the end of May, and there wasn't a problem with it. And as a matter of fact, about 3 years later, my father was fishing with a guy called Jim Mack from Coon outside, and they were out one day and it was very wild, and Jim had a bit of an injury on his shoulder at the time, and they got a lot of fish that morning, and the wind stayed up, so most boats had to go with 3 men that evening. I was actually finishing my last exam in the tech, and it was actually art. I was in there only about 15 minutes, and a knock came to the door, and there was wanted down the reception. So to my father and Jim, they said, Mike, you'll have to come out with us. There's a few pale there, and it is a bit wild, So I was delighted actually. So I went back up. I said, give me 5 minutes, and I finished off the little bits and pieces I was doing, signed my name, and went out and actually passed the art. So that was pure luck now. And actually we went out that evening, and as soon as we got out, the wind died out, it was flat calm, and the fish were gone as well. So we were out all evening for one between 3 of us.
Yeah.
But that happens, But I stayed at it then, and the Reed as well. We'd start fishing. What happened actually was, years back, the fishing was the 1st of February was the opening day, and people would be cutting the Reed up to then, but a lot of them might keep going up to Paddy's Day at the Reed if there was still Reed left around to cut, and all was there for it. And when they were finished the Reed, they'd start fishing spring salmon first, and they'd bring them into the pale season, as we'd call it, the summer salmon grills. And that would continue on till the end of July. Well, it was actually 19th of July was the finishing day at that time. And we have a couple of slack weeks then, till could be the middle of September, maybe you might go back cutting the Reed again. But the Reed would be very leafy at that time, because the green leaves were still on it, but it was mostly farmers and thatched cottages that were buying it, so they didn't seem to mind too much about the leaves and things. But later on, when the thatchers then started buying it directly, they didn't want to have the hassle of the leaves on the Reed, so it would be the middle of November before you'd start then, you know, when the leaf would be nearly gone, almost died off it after a few hard frosts and a breeze of wind. Most of the leaves would be gone off it then, so it meant less work for the thatchers, you know.
And how would you cut the reeds? What was the whole process there?
The whole process, well, you'd have a sickle, and we'll say sometimes you could just walk down over the bank and cut local areas, and then as time went on, when they were cut, you'd have to move. You'd probably be going by boat then, you know. So you'd cut your reed, and you might be cutting maybe for 3 hours, and then you'd come along and tie it all up into sheaves, we'll say, bundles, and then you'd bring that out to the side of the river for loading onto the boat. Load your boat and tie it down, and well, years back they used to row with the reed to the bridges, but like it's all motors now, you know. So you drive to the whatever bridge you were going to then, probably the one in the Innis Road, the Sandy Bridge there, up by the Limerick Inn, and you unload your reed there, then it's back up in the back again and over the bank and stacked. And I mean, before your reed would be gone, you would have handled it 7 or 8 times, you know. It was hard work, no, real hard work cutting the reed. I mean, you couldn't hide down there, you know, if you didn't put in the work. That was it, you wouldn't have the reed at the end of the day, you know.
What age were you when you started that as well?
I was about probably 16, I'd say, I started at the reed, yeah. Well, I often go down and help my father, we'd say, if he was down, we'd say if he wasn't gone by boat, we'd walk down and we might tie up some reed for him and help him carry it out and that, or sometimes go up in the boat with him and things, but probably about 16 when I started cutting it myself, you know.
And were you ever involved in the thatching as well, or?
No, we never got involved in the thatching. There was a course ran out in Anco at one stage, and a few of us were thinking about it, but we reckoned we wouldn't have the time with the fishing to be thatching in the summer, which was a mistake at the time now, but years back when there was lots of thatched houses in Kona, most of the houses would have been thatched. Everybody could thatch their own little bit, you know. Now, a lot of it would be patching, you know what I mean, and they all had their own little area down the marsh as well, which was it was divided, we'd say, with the sally trees. They would set a little line of them, and you had a section, and the next person, there was loads for everyone, we'd say, you know. And either the trees would divide it or different creeks would divide it, you know. But the trees are still down there, actually.
Was there ever any disagreements with people crossing over the lines?
And I've never heard of that now, really, you know. If somebody was probably stuck for a bit, they could take a bit of someone else, and you know, next year. But I mean, if you're tipping away, doing a bit every year or every second, you'd have to kind of cut it every year to keep it new for the following year. You know, you wouldn't want any old stuff through it. Everyone had enough, if you know what I mean, because they weren't thatching the house completely. We'd say they were just, there was plenty there for everyone, really, you know.
And how far downriver did the reeds grow?
Well, they actually start growing at Spillane's Tower, the snuff box, up by Bampton's Pier there on the south shore, we'll say. They start there, and they grow on both shores all the way down as far as Shannon Airport. Now, some areas would be sparse, we'll say, but mainly on the north shore probably would be more reed on the north shore than the south shore in general, you know. The south shore in areas was very narrow, whereas on the north shore you had maybe 400 yards in places from the edge of the river into the bank, you know. So there would have been a lot more reed there, you know, at that side.
And when you were fishing, I know there was salmon, but what other kinds of fish?
Well, salmon was the main catch. That's what we were fishing for. We were fishing with salmon nets, you know. It'd be 5 or 5.5 inch mesh for the grills, the summer salmon, and there would have been 6 or 6.5 inch mesh for the spring salmon. But it's seldom you would catch other types of fish when you were using those meshes, size meshes. But we used to catch a lot of flatfish now, flounder, we'll say. But I've noticed that they got scarce as well towards the end of the fishing, you know. I mean, we'd often maybe get a dozen flounder in the day, depending on where you were fishing. If you were fishing on the mud flats a lot, you'd be guaranteed, we'll say, to get a lot of the flounder, you know. and we'd get a lot of trout as well, which seemed to have been scarce as well towards the end of it, and a nice few sea trout, and we'd catch a lot of the smelt, which were the smaller fish, you know, but and a lot of eels, but that would be generally it, you know. And night time you'd get a mackerel or a herring, which would be very rare, you know.
Did you ever come across a fish called a pollen? It looked sort of like a salmon, I was told.
It's possible that we've had, they wouldn't be as big as salmon, I don't think, no, you know, but we'd often catch smaller fish and you just disregard them really without thinking, you know. But I couldn't say for definite now that we did, you know, but I'm sure we probably did, you know. I mean, a lot of our fishing was done in night time as well, and like anything you didn't want was just thrown back in, you know what I mean, and you probably be a bit busy to be going along checking them and stuff, you know. We got an odd sea bass down, you know, after the storm. We had a bad gale of wind, you know, a day or two later you could pick up an odd sea bass, you know, and they'd be probably blown in with the wind, you know. So that'd be about it, like in general down there. The odd time you'd catch a pike, it'd be just a bite catch as well, you know. But that'd be about the size of it now, you know.
What kind of tools did you use for the fishing? What boats? And you mentioned a little bit about the nets there.
Yeah, well, our nets, we would have been using drift nets, and there would have been a few shore nets as well, but mostly in Kona it was drift netting, you know. But it had been all shore fishing, we'll say, for a long time. It was, I'd say, 50s and 60s again when the drifting got more popular with the shore fishing. It had its good points and bad points. It's good points where you knew when you were going out and you knew when you were coming in. As soon as the mud's bared off, you could go fishing, shore fishing, and as soon as they covered, you had to come in then, you know, because you had a guy walking the mud, we'll say, with the rope. So with the drifting, you could go out any time. So what happened, as far as I know, is one or two people started to get the drift nets, and when there was a breeze of wind there, the old shore fishing could be awkward, you know. So when you had a good breeze there and the muds were covered, they'd go drifting. So I think they found they were actually catching more with the drift net. And no, the old nets wouldn't have been great quality at the start, you know. There would have been flax and that, and they wouldn't last maybe 2 or 3 weeks. You might have to go through 3 sets of nets for the fish a season. And even the hemp ropes that time, they would rot fairly easily, you know. But as things progressed, the nets started to get a bit better. They started the nylon nets then, and it's actually, it's nearly everything is nearly nylon now, you know. But there was still a few the shore net licenses down in Newtown there, down in Clarina, we'll say. The traff licenses, they would call them now, traff fishing, you know.
And where would you get the nets from originally?
Well, for years they'd get them at Rinny Cusick. The fish buyer would bring in the nets, and he'd have a stock of them inside, and you could go in that time and just pick up a couple of nets and pay him when you started fishing. Then, you know, he would just deduct it from the amount that you were due with. And for the last 20 or 25 years of the fishing, I reckon people were experimenting more. You know, they were sending off or driving to the likes of Glendore and Cork or Waterford. Even we went as far as Donegal for nets at times. Cork, we kind of would experiment with a net, we'll say, and if you were happy enough for it, you'd go for it again next year. Sometimes there was a problem with the knots running in the nets as well. You know, if you got caught, we'll say, on a snag, if you were fast on a snag and a strong tide at times, the knots would run on the net and the meshes wouldn't be opened, like we'll say, you know. You'd lose a lot of fish over that, so you were kind of watching the whole time and learning, if you know what I mean. So you kind of you wouldn't stay with the same crowd the whole time. If you got a better net or a better price even, you'd move around, you know. But you were saying about the different fish there a minute ago. They used to fish for herons as well, which is back a long time now, you know. And they used to make their own nets, the heron nets, but they'd have to travel well down the estuary now for the herons, you know. And a lot of the Newtown lads would fish for the herons there as well, you know. There's even a place down the river past Shannon there, nice bit past Shannon actually, called Herring Rock. So you wonder where it got its name from, you know. So, but of course the herring died out as well, you know. They were overfished, not by the inshore crowd, but by the crowd, and the course was that happened all over the world actually for a while, the herrings, you know. Scotland as well.
And did were the boats and the nets, were they blessed, or was there any folklore around them?
Yeah, this always very important thing was to have your boat blessed. A new boat, when she'd be ready, you get the parish priest out to bless it, and most people would have the net blessed as well, believe it or not, yeah. And actually I can remember back mounting a net, as we used to call it, tying up a net, you know. And it was on a Friday, just at the start of the fishing, and the priest just come around that time every first Friday of every month. So I remember my father watching out for him, because he wouldn't go to every house, no, he'd be to the elderly people, he would give them confessions and communion and things, so he was watching out for him all day, and he finally got him anyway. And while the net was actually hanging on the ropes, we used to tie it onto the oars, the two ropes, and then one at each side you'd mount on your net, you know, and put in your floats and things, space them out. And he got it blessed anyway while it was hanging off the oars. He was very confident now that year with that net.
Can you tell me a little bit more about that, about the mounting of the net and what the process was there?
Yeah, the old guys used to say mounting a net was a trade in its own. And we used to have a laugh at that, you know, but I suppose I put it this way, you, in 20 years time there won't be many around that would know how to mount a net. See, you'll get a net, you'll get what we used to call a hanky net, it would be 100 yards. Now that would only mount 50 yards. It would be 100 stretched out, but when they'd be tied up it would only mount up 50. So you'd want 3 hanks to mount a new net, right? So you had your 3 hanks in it, then you had your cork line, your top line we'll say, which would, years back the both lines would be hemp, the cork line, the floating line would be a lighter one, and you'd have the old cork floats along it, and you'd have a thicker hemp rope then for the lead line, the sinking line. And but then later we started using nylon for the float line to nearly float on its own, you know. And we experimented with different types of lead lines, and everybody maybe had 2 different ropes then for the finish and whatever suited people, you know. But yeah, well, you have to, about a 40 yards of a stretch, you want a good clean field, and you'd make your holes for the oars with a crowbar. You'd put down maybe 5 or 6 oars spaced out, maybe 12 yards apart or whatever, maybe, or between 9 and 12, and you'd have a string around the top of them then with a hemp. So you'd then tie on your 2 ropes, one above the other, the cork line above the lead line usually. You tie them on tight, and you'd fasten that down into a crowbar, we'll say the first one. So then you'd have one guy would go ahead and hold the 2 ropes with a strain on them, leaving the lead line slightly lower, so you could mount opposite, you know. And then the other guy would come along and tie that certain way of tying it, then onto the next one, and then you would secure it again with a crowbar or a stake at the very end. So it was important to keep them tight, and very important to keep them in line, that they wouldn't slide past each other, because you'd get what you used to call a drag in the net then. The net would be pulled one way or the other way, but you'd actually notice while you were mounting it then, if it was kind of coming up off the ground, that there was something wrong. They'd say there was a purse in it, you know. So it was important to keep an eye on those things, you know. And you'd have your needle then, we'll say, that would be filled. You'd have a ball of hemp, fill your needle, and nice and tight, and you'd dip that in water to stop it blowing around in the wind. So you'd start off, then you'd put up your first hitch, up the 2 guys opposite each other. So one fella would move along maybe a foot or 2 ahead, and that, so that they wouldn't be hitting each other. So you just the fella on the lead line then usually would lead, and it was very important to keep the proper space between each hitch and the rope as well, you know. Now, when you'd be used to doing it, you could just judge it, and plus the hanging, the depth of it was usually the width of your hand, you know. So here's the rope, and it's down catching into the net here and up, so that would be the depth usually, about 4 inches. So yeah, he would move along, and the guy coming along on the cockline behind him then would it was his job then to put the floats in as well, you know. So they would space out the floats. The normal was the width of your 2 arms plus a foot, maybe a foot or 2. So you'd nearly want the same guy mounting the cockline for the whole lot, you know. Now there was some people there that were very particular. I won't mention any names now, but they used to have a little measuring stick for each hanging, and more of them would go along and mark the rope with a bit of cow dung. Didn't have any markers at the time. And more of them would measure out the space for the floats, you know, but in general that's the way it was done. You'd have your tip in one float here, 2 hands spread out like that, and maybe a foot or 2 foot, depends on what type of floats you had as well. And so that was a day's work for 2 or 3 guys at least. You'd nearly want 3, like, you know. So every time you mount a stretch of it in, we call that a stretch, you would all open down the whole lot again then, and you would haul it back up then and into a bag, and then start up at your last hitch again, tie it on and go through the same process again. Normally it would take 4 or 5 stretches, as they call it, to mount a full net. So that was the mounting of the nets anyway.
And how often would that have to be done?
Well, for the last few years, with the new gear that they had as regards the nylon mountain twine and nylon ropes and nylon nets, you could get 5 years out of the nets if you minded them, if you didn't get them tore too much. That would probably be their lifespan. But like if you fished a fairly hard season there and that, and you were going the 2 tides night and day, you couldn't avoid getting caught in snags and things at times, and the boys in the river as well. If you misjudged that or whatever, they're doing a lot of damage to the nets, you know. Some people had to mount it twice in the year, and more people might get away with 2 or 3 years between mounting, you know. Depends on how much they were being used and how careful they were and stuff, you know. But in generally speaking, probably you mount up a new net nearly every year, you know.
You're saying there about nighttime and daytime. Was there a difference in how you fished in the daytime or in the nighttime?
No, there wouldn't have been any difference in the way we fished. The only difference would be you couldn't see what you were doing in the nighttime, and a lot of it was chance, you know. You weren't sure what way your net was stretched and things, but in general you'd nearly kind of be okay, I would say. And the other difference would be, we'll say, when you'd be queuing up for your drift. I mean, I'm talking when all boats were fishing and all the licenses were out, you could just say you went down fishing at 12 o'clock in the night. You mightn't wet your net till 2 o'clock in the morning, because there might be a queue for a certain drift. There could be 4 or 5 boats in front of you, and it could be worth waiting for that drift, you know. So what would happen during the day, when the boat would hit a certain point on the land, you'd have a mark. It could be a tree or something from the position where you lie up to the finish of the drift. You take an angle, and you know, so you'd know it's your turn to go in. But in the night time you couldn't see that, so they would light a match or flick a light or a torch when they were at that position. Now some people would give it right on time, more would leave it go on, and so you kind of go by time as well, you know.
Yep.
You know, maybe 25 minutes adrift kind of would be the norm for the most popular ones, you know. But that was always in the going tide, we'd say the ebbing tide. You wouldn't have that much line up for the flood tide. You'd fish your low water and you'd come back either to the tower or the tying lamp, as they called it, and you'd have your cup of tea or your sandwich or whatever, and there might be 4 or 5, 6 boats at each station, and you might be there for an hour, and everyone would go aft in their turn.
Yeah.
And in the flood tide you'll be fishing all the time till you come to the stint light, you know. and you'd float most rocks and things as well. You have to watch out for the buoys really, and ships. That was the other danger in the flood tide, depending on what shore you were. You'd have to be watching out for those as well, especially in the night time,
With the ships, how much interaction did you have? So, there was the docks up in Limerick and ships coming in and down.
Well, years back there was no navigation buoys on the river, so they kind of, as the fella said, they sneaked them in one by one here and one there. You get over it, but next thing there was nearly every drift there was a buoy. So they became very awkward for the fishermen for the finish, A lot of nets now were lost and damaged on those buoys, And the ships themselves, there's plenty of stories of the ships going into nets and cutting them in half, but that would be kind of the person's own fault really,
And did you have much interaction with the bailiffs?
Yeah, there was a lot of interaction with the bailiffs. Well, in the earlier years, everybody was rowing, fishermen and bailiffs, so they could always outrow them, So it wasn't that much of a problem unless they really got caught now right-handed, But when the bailiffs then got the power boats and that, it was like what I'm talking about now would be just maybe, when you're off at 6 o'clock on a Saturday morning, you have to be off at 6 until 6 o'clock Monday morning. If there was a few fish running, you might leave it down for maybe half an hour or what, or waiting for the tide to rise to float in above home, and they could make an appearance, and you might have an argument with your watch and the clocks and everything. And that time, if people might chance to go out on a Saturday night or a Sunday night, and they could arrive down, and you'd kind of nearly have to leave them at Gordon and just try and get away and leave them the net, It didn't happen that often, we'll say, but there was a few different cases, and there's one or two cases of people that their net would have run slightly past the stent, which was kind of the way we fish there. Your net would run up there anyway, and by the time you'd start hauling, by the time you'd have been, you might be gone 20 yards past the limb, which didn't really mean anything, but if there were sticklers, like which some of them were, and they were around, they could prosecute you for it, But apart from that, there wasn't much interaction with them, Although for the last 3 years we fished, we were on the tag system, and they were down towards the end of the season checking everybody's tags, because if you ran out of tags you couldn't fish. But what happened was the majority of the tags were gone out to the coast, and you might have maybe 50 or 60 tags used. You would be just taking it easy because the seasons weren't great at the time, and we'd go down on Monday maybe and get tags. We might go down and they might tell you, the tags are gone. And we say, where are they gone? Oh, they're gone down the coast. So we'd always keep 5 or 6 tags, so that we still had a time to go out, if you know what I mean, No one actually ran out of tags, I think.
And were there any accidents? Were boats tipping over and that sort of thing?
Not a whole lot, but there was a few incidents. People out in bad boats and things. And I remember one time there was these guys out fishing there from Limerick, and the bottom of the boat actually fell out. So they were only in a few feet of water at the time, which was lucky enough. But they were saved anyway. But that was just down to negligence again, There was another incident. There was a guy drowned from Orclas there, Gabriel Hickey. He was out fishing with Munch and Kinney, and they got a few fish, and they went up to Duttinelli's to sell the fish, because that time you might get a better price in the hotels and places, And when they're leaving, Gabriel Hickey was back trying to start the engine or put on the engine or whatever, and he got a stumble anyway, and he fell out and he got drowned there, and he was found later on that evening at just under the arch of the bridge. It was tragic. He had a young family and all. He's actually a relation of, he was the first cousin of my father's now, His mother would have been Davis, who would have been my grandmother's people. But that was terrible tragedy at the time, yeah.
And could the fishermen swim?
Well, you know, the funny thing about it is most of them couldn't. Now, my own generation and that, most of us could. But my father and grandfather could swim okay. But a lot of the other guys, believe it or not, they couldn't swim. But I think, I've heard a story about a lot of them being in the Navy, that they were told they were better off if they couldn't swim. If something happened, like if they were in the water, you know, they were only prolonging things like if they could swim. So a lot of them kind of had that way of thinking as well, you know, which is strange, but that's what I believe anyway.
Where would you get the boats?
Yeah, there was a few traditional boat builders in Limerick. There was the Dorans, the Farrells would have been building boats in the bins back in Ernie's. But most people would go to Blackie Doran for their boat, you know. He used to build a lovely boat, lovely fishing boat, you know, lovely sea boat as we used to call it, you know. But and a nice, would be a nice light boat as well. But a few started nearly in every fishing village. There was somebody who was be handy enough at a boat to build one or repair it, you know. So even our own place there for the last maybe 30 years, we had 2 or 3 different people that would be tipping away at the boats and to build them for themselves, you know. So most places, in Clarecastle as well, there was a few boat builders. Same out in Newtown there, you had Roberts and Peter Burns and them, they'd be building their own boats, you know.
And where were the fish sold?
The main fish buyer back in the day would have been Rennie Cusick. Now there was a few other smaller fish buyers who would come and take a good few, like, but I mean when the season was in full swing and when you had boats coming in, you might have 10 boats coming in Kona, and they could have 50 or 60 fish each. That's what you needed, the main fish buyer then, like Rennie Cusick. Rennie would send out his vans to Kona that time. Rennie would actually follow the tides as well. It wouldn't be unusual for a Rennie Cusick fan to be up on the road at 12 o'clock at night, if that's the time. Because most boats would all come in within an hour and a half of each other, because you needed to come in, you needed to get some sleep and go back out to fish the next tide again, you know. So he would have them, he'd come in during the day for the day tide, and he'd come at night. Or else if it was gone too late in the night, would have gone into the early mornings, he would come out early in the morning again and take the night's catch, you know. So he would leave his fish boxes then, and you'd fill your fish boxes. Now you wouldn't be filling them all the time, but when there was fish running, you'd fill a couple of boxes and you'd have your name on a tag, each box tied on, you know. So he'd do all the houses then, all the fishing houses, and back in with them, and he'd be out again. Then when the old fish were getting scarce towards the end of the season, he might just make a trip once a day, you know. So he would have been the main fish buyer. But now the hotels and stuff, they'd buy a few as well, you know. And you had the smaller fish buyers in town would take a few, but when they'd get so many, would say they'd have enough, you know. But Rennie Cusick was exporting the fish at the time. Yeah, so he'd take it, the more he got, the better, you know.
What were the best spots to fish in the river?
It's a funny one, no? You see, different fishermen now had different favourite spots, you know. But speaking from a Kona point of view, the 80 tide in the Vaughan tide, would say, was always great. You were only guaranteed if you fish there. That's why people would maybe lie up for 2 hours, wait their turn. You'd want to be very unlucky to miss from down there now. And there was a place called Ballandray, which would be further down. Would have been a great spot for the actual low water. That would have been, you know, when the tide would stop and start to flood again and begin to rise, that would have been a favourite spot as well, you know. And the hole would have been another favourite spot, but I probably shouldn't be mentioning that. That would have been in the ebb and tide now, but in the flood tide then, the flats and over the rocks there, that would be near the Stint Light, was a great spot because there was a natural height there of rocks, and your net was very close to the bottom most times, plus the river kind of narrowed in there at a point, you know. What they used to say is you had a chance of both shores up over the rocks, you know. You had a chance of fish coming off the south shore as well as the north shore, especially now if there wasn't many boats fishing at the time. But if the boats were lined south and north down along, they had a lot of nets to pass to get up to that point. But if you happened to be out maybe at 4 o'clock in the morning and you had the river fairly quiet yourself, it would have been a good spot for the high water, you know. Because as I say, you'd have to run a boat shores there and you were on a height. It's one of the best places around for the high water, you know.
What
I can't be giving away all my secrets.
What did you wear? Was there particular clothing that you wore?
No, not in particular. The guy on the net would always have leggings on him and an oilskin. Just you'd have something warm for the night time. There was no costume as such, you know. Whatever was handy. Yeah.
And when you were on the boat, was there much banter? Or was it quiet?
There would have been a good old crack when you'd be lying up in the mud now. As I said, there could be 4, 5, 6 boats there, and there was some great banter there on the muds at times, you know. There was often a sing-song, especially in the night time, and especially when there was no fish there. But when there was plenty of fish around, everyone seemed to be kind of minding their own little business and keeping away from other boats and stuff, you know. But when the strand fishermen, 1 or 2 of them used to say, when you'd hear the conic men, as they called them, the cona men, when you'd hear the cona men singing, there was no fish there.
So, you know, the license are gone. Is there, you know, was there a noticeable decrease in the fish before that, before the licenses were taken away?
Yeah, fish had been decreasing there for a few years, but funny enough, the last year we fished 2006. It seemed to have been a very good year, strangely enough. I don't know if that trend has continued or not, but I caught 50 fish with Mike Davis on the 7th of July in 2006, and I hadn't caught 50 in a tide before that since the 80s. So and that was the 7th of July, as I said, and the fish started to come a little bit later each season, you know. But there was fish lasted right to the end of the season, till the end of July that year. There was plenty of fish around. But people hardly believed that we caught 50, you know, and we actually hadn't enough tags for us, so we had to go down to the Ashbourne Park to the fisheries board office below to get the tags, and she asked how much she wanted. We said we shot 30 tags. She said, had you none left? We said we had 20. So she didn't believe us, so she came down and looked in the back of the van, and she actually called a few more out of the office, and they took scales and things from maybe half the fish just to test them and find out that the scale of a fish tells an awful lot about his history and life cycle, you know. But that was the 7th of July, so that was 2006, so I don't know. I mean, there should be a lot more fish around, with the fact that the trawlers on the coast are gone as well. It doesn't seem to be that way, so there must be some other factors that we're not sure about, you know. As I said, fish started to come back later and smaller. Like fish that should be there, we'll say, 2nd or 3rd week of June, weren't coming into the 2nd week of July. And fish that we caught in July were always a bigger fish, you know. I mean, early, the first few fish you get in May, you might get a few 4-pounders and 4.5-pounders. In June that would be increasing up to around the 6 average mark, and in July the average would be 7 and 8 pound weight, you know. These were fish that would have stayed feeding at sea longer. And they'd be that bit bigger coming in, the brownbackers we used to call them. So they tend to have a kind of a brown sheen to their back, you know. But yeah, that's the story of the fish anyway.
And one last question, what was the biggest fish that you caught?
The biggest fish I caught was 22 pound weight. My father caught, the biggest one I saw was 25 pound weight. My father caught with a chap called Anthony Kinney. And my grandfather caught a 52 pounder that I didn't, obviously I wasn't around that time. And like 50 plus fish wouldn't have been a rare thing. It probably would have been a rare thing, but the average fish that time for spring salmon would have been around, always over 20 and around 25. I remember my grandfather told me that they fished one time, one night in particular, in a place called, just the name eludes me now for a minute. I think it was the Half Door was the name of the place that would have been up towards Limerick. It was during the time of the Troubles, and the Kona fishermen were trying to reclaim that stretch of the river. So they took it in their turns, they rotated with 6 crews, and there was 6 draws. It was all shore fishing that time. And the dangerous draw was the far up one with South Barrington's Pier. So the next night then you would move down a draw and down till eventually you'd be back in Kona. But he said they went up one night and they made a draw, and there was so much fish in the net that they tore away the belly piece of the net. Just they ended up with nothing. And another night they fished up there. This is spring salmon over here in mind, like. And they made a couple of draws, and they had 10 fish, 10 spring salmon. And the smallest of the fish, the smallest weight was 25 pound weight. Now if you see a 25 pound fish now, you'd be taking photographs of him, getting him stuffed and everything, you know. But the Army Crusher power station had a lot to do with that, believe it or not, yeah. They started the decline of the spring fish. They almost wiped them out at one stage. Slowly coming back again now, you know, but not in those kind of numbers, because actually back in that time, my grandfather's time, the spring fishing was more important fishing than the pale fishing, as we call them. Because they were actually more plentiful, the spring salmon, and you'd need 4 or 5 of the pale to make up one spring salmon, you know. And can you picture the steaks now, and it's a 25 pound fish, like, compared to a 4 pounder. The 4 pound fish would be like the little thing you get in the tin, the steaks that size, you know. But yeah, it's such a pity. The spring salmon that time, they used an 8-inch mesh for drifting in my grandfather's time. An 8-inch mesh. Now the average mesh now at the moment is 5 inches for spring fish, you know, or for summer fish, and 6 for spring. So I mean 2 inches, that's an awful lot in the size of a fish's head, weight wise then as well, you know. So that then kind of came down to 7 after few years after the power station was built, and then it's the last years we fished it was a 6-inch mesh we use, you know. And if you were going out today, it was a 6-inch you'd use, you know. So yeah, as I said, Arna Crusher has a lot to account for in that sense. There's nothing much you can do about it now, I suppose, you know.
And thank you very much for taking your time to speak to me.